On the 11th of June 2020, Capcom announced Resident Evil Village, the newest entry in its most popular series. The debut trailer showcased tons of action, a setting reminiscent of Resident Evil IV, and monsters that appear to include werewolves and even vampires. From watching the initial trailer, I watched excitedly as Resident Evil trod new ground, but through a lens glossed with concern. 3 years prior, Capcom had successfully released a soft reboot of the franchise with Resident Evil VII Biohazard, which I will simply refer to as Biohazard. Biohazard took the series in a new direction with a first-person gameplay perspective and re-emphasis on horror that the series had moved away from. Up until this point, Resident Evil had been populated by zombies, monsters and mutant bioweapons, but this time around the inspirations were clearly very different. The game paid homage to a variety of different horror influences that could be likened to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Exorcist, Ring, and even Saw. Franchises I never really expected to see referenced in a Resident Evil game, let alone influencing it. The overall themes of the story dealt with psychological, supernatural, and grotesque horror elements, and as a complete package, it felt like a love letter to the genre in general. I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least one element in here that didn't scare you as a player in some way, shape or form. I absolutely loved Biohazard, but it also terrified me. I played it for the first time last year and found it so immersive and mind-blowing that it sent me down a rabbit hole of Resident Evil as a franchise in general. It was without question the most I enjoyed playing a game in 2020, and the horror was undoubtedly a highlight. There were moments where I even had to switch it off because it got too much for me. After finishing the game, couldn't stop thinking about it as it had hit me on so many levels, watching video after video on its lore from some fantastic creators. At the time of its release, despite some purists maybe not liking how the game had departed some of its then current established tropes, Biohazard received critical acclaim and was perceived to be one of the best Resident Evils and even survival horrors in recent memory. Given how much the genre had evolved since Resident Evil's conception, with breakout hits like Amnesia, Outlast and of course PT, this was a big achievement. It seemed only right that given the success of this experiment that we would get a follow-up that followed suit and dive deeper into that horror element. While the visuals were beyond impressive and the spectacle of the location was mesmerizing, the vibe that Village's trailer had set was another bold choice for Resident Evil and one I wasn't 100% sold on. Could these folklore-styled elements fit within the series' re-emergence as a truly scary survival horror series? Given how much it seemed like a spiritual successor to 4, only added to my concerns, as that game, while incredible, had signalled the series' shift to action and abandoning of fear almost entirely. The scare factor of Village has been a topic that has cropped up a few times around its release, with the game's producer Tsuyoshi Kanda going as far to state that some of the feedback towards the previous game was that it was too scary to play, and they had eased up on the tension curve in Village because of it. I worried when I read this and wondered whether or not he was trying to fool us, luring us into a false sense of security. Some of the game's marketing campaigns chose to highlight the ensemble of key villains in a cutesy puppet show video format to reiterate a tongue-in-cheek, "We're not scary, come play in RE Village," and it felt like it had to be a ruse. Were they hiding the true horror from us? Well, kind of. Having finished Village's main campaign, there are definitely choices made with its opening segments, main characters, and core gameplay loop that impact the amount of fear the game imposes. These changes lead to a more action-oriented experience that revisits some of Biohazard's horrors in a familiar way that could never be quite as effective the second time round. Today we'll explore how the game does this and whether the changes to the scares hurt the experience. Little reminder before we get started, if you enjoy this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. That most definitely will not alert you when I do actually upload. Cheers YouTube. Biohazard opened with our introduction to Ethan Winters and his missing wife Mia, with Ethan choosing to investigate her whereabouts after receiving a mysterious video message and warning, which he tracks to an outback part of Louisiana. When Ethan arrives at the location, there are countless warning signs, ranging from dangerous traps to dead animals that really allow the dread to build up in the player's own head. Upon reaching the front door, we ourselves have to take a plunge into the darkness and the unknown. Whilst playing the game for the first time, this felt like the first true step into the horror and was one of the hardest in-game steps for me to take. The fear of the unknown is the reason why Biohazard's opening hours are so effective. Even if you'd followed the series up until this point, this new setting and presentation completely clashes with everything you knew Resident Evil stood for. I found myself questioning whether this would share a connection with the rest of the series, and it made the seemingly supernatural elements hit much harder on my first playthrough. I didn't know what the rules to this reality were, so it made everything feel a little bit more shocking. Ethan acts as a vessel for this rebooted story, and you're in the dark as much as he is. Our fear grows with his as he heads deeper into the abyss, discovering a vacant family home, complete with rotting food, disgusting sights, and VHS tapes that uncover dark found footage style videos of a missing film crew and their demise. The environment does so much to elicit fear and drip feed us information in the form of news clippings, letters, photographs, a child's drawings, and they all subtly underpin the story of this game and build an anxiety around the whole scenario. There's a masterful level of tension in this opening which keeps throwing you for a loop. I couldn't work out if these sections with a possessed Mia were cutscenes or gameplay, and it put me extremely on edge, especially when she'd stabbed me through the hand. Resident Evil Village opens very differently. Following the events of the first game, we are treated to a look inside the home of Ethan and Mia Winters and are introduced to their child Rose, a chubby bundle of joy. Veering into their home life like this is a tremendous way of getting your attention and adding to a looming unease over what is going to happen to the family. It's insidious and works very well as a horror setting, establishing the normal before we are hit with the horror. However, the invasion of Chris Redfield and murder of Mia, while horrifying and shocking, didn't elicit fear within me. It created questions that held weight in terms of the narrative, but it didn't make me feel uncomfortable in the same way walking through the Baker estate had. It felt more like a dramatic plot point that carried the story forward. The next section of the intro takes us to the scene of a car crash, following the abduction of Ethan and Rose Winters, and we follow Ethan into the woods in pursuit of his missing daughter. There is more scary tension here as we build up to our first showdown with the Lycans, but it's definitely a bit less subtle and faster paced. We get a glimpse of a Lycan almost immediately, before heading through a few set pieces reminiscent of Biohazard's walk towards the Baker estate, such as the hanging of dead crows outside the village, though this time we opt for an obvious jump scare with one of the crows startling us, rather than simply imposing some dread. The opening shot of the village itself when dawn breaks is an incredible visual and one that highlights the fantastical scope of the game's setting, but if anything, this really made me want to continue on, rather than cower outside the door of the Baker household. After entering the village and entering the first house, we find the environment does again try to create a mood of fear and dread with abandoned houses, dark interiors, blood-stained floorboards, religious iconography, and taxidermy animals. But this isn't given all that much time to breathe, as we are quickly thrown into gun combat with a Lycan, a big difference from the rough scramble with Mia in the previous title, where we bludgeon her with an axe and still can't get rid of her. We down our enemy and are shown very quickly that combat and bullets will get rid of enemies for good, and that is the true focus here. The slow burn from Biohazard is clearly abandoned in favour of action, and it reduces the fear greatly, but as I've already mentioned, that's not the only way Village does this. Resident Evil has always been a series with a big cast of characters, but since the shift to first person, they've perhaps been more interesting than they've ever been before. Biohazard introduced the core antagonist group, the Bakers, who are frankly the stars of the show. While the mutations do come the more you engage with them, and there is a realization they are technically Resident Evil bioweapons deep down, the early interactions with them always scared me the most, and that's likely because of how grounded in reality they actually were. The Bakers are a real feeling family, with their memories quite literally scattered around the Baker estate. There is a tragicness to Jack and Marguerite especially, as you'll discover they were once nice, normal people. It's horrifying watching the Bakers chow down on human innards at the dinner table, not just because it's disgusting, but because despite how dysfunctional they are as a unit, they are still somehow coexisting. Many broken families will choose to stubbornly stick things out, despite things being very wrong, and this image takes that to the next level. Their shouting, bickering, and unpredictable moods made me feel the most uncomfortable, evoking some of my own memories growing up in an argument-filled household. My dad didn't chop off my arm though. Jack and Marguerite provided almost all of my scares in this game. Being pursued by Jack around the house was very frightening, and when this first happened, I unloaded way too many bullets in a panic, not realizing he was invulnerable. The fact that he wasn't what I expected in a Resident Evil made him all the scarier, as he gleefully gave chase and rolled out one-liner after one-liner about what he was going to do to me and how he was going to enjoy doing it. It's ironic that he is infected with mold, as to me he looked literally like a mouldy human being, a literal living and breathing corpse. I actually thought he might be an undead zombie with a higher level of sentience. I couldn't understand what he was, and that unknown made him so perplexing and terrifying. I think Marguerite may have terrified me more than Jack did. Her voice sent shivers through me like nails on a chalkboard, and I hated being pursued by her in both Mia or Ethan's segments. Her horrific transformation, as revealed by the worst jump scare of the game, made for the game's most intense boss fight, and I can't even begin to put into words just how relieved I was when this battle had ended. After finishing the game, I watched Nightmind's fantastic video and was horrified even more by the fact that her insect womb-focused transformation may have actually been drawing on her own loss of a child. While these two characters did provide the majority of my fear, they weren't the only successful character elements. Lucas was also effective in his own way. His backstory didn't scare me as such, but the reveal that he was actually messed up long before the mold came along did give reminder of the true horrors of the real world, and again draw Biohazard into reality. The Grandma also provided a tremendous looming presence that constantly left me anticipating the worst, whether it was just the sight of her sitting in her wheelchair or humming "Go Tell Aunt Rhody." I was always bothered by her appearances and was convinced she was going to jump out of her chair every time I saw her. The decision to include her in so many places, often after an intense section and even in areas where you wouldn't expect her, felt like a reminder that I wasn't safe. Village changes up the way it handles its characters quite drastically, while actually maintaining the family unit in a much more misfit and dysfunctional sense. It's clear from a design perspective alone just how different of an approach Capcom wanted to take with these characters, and their theming is very different to such an extent that they feel like a group of supervillains led by lead antagonist Mother Miranda. Lady Dimitrescu is a 9-foot woman resembling a vampire. She has a tremendous presence, an incredible character design, with her fears perhaps weakened if you'd looked at any social media prior to the game's release. Donna Beneviento hides her face and communicates via childlike doll, giving off the Chucky effect. Salvatore MOREAU is a literal fish man already halfway through his mutation. He likes to watch static TV, eat cheese, and vomit. Carl Heisenberg looks like a Devil May Cry interpretation of Van Helsing, with a charisma that feels like he is taking part in a stage play. And of course, Mother Miranda gives off true final boss energy and is a perfect foe for Ethan, with realistic motivation for the evil she pursues. All of them are incredibly memorable characters, with distinct looks and interesting backstories, but I'm shocked by just how little I actually have to say about any of them when it comes to the actual scares they provide. I have nothing to say. Almost any fears imposed by them in their sections come from them indirectly as a result of their abilities or actions, which is the biggest departure from the Bakers, who imposed fear directly through their strong characterizations. Below the surface, these groups of characters do have some underlying similarities. They are both family units that against their will have been warped by the mold and primary antagonist of their respective games. They were all normal people at some point, but they couldn't be less alike when it comes to scares. To quote Ethan, "The Four Lords are a group of freaks who are already clearly well beyond the levels of reality, and they completely flush away the psychological horror Biohazard established." Speaking of Ethan, there is no better encapsulation of the tonal shift than how he acts throughout the story. Ethan was a fresh face to the series in Biohazard, and a true fish out of water, sorry for the pun, Moreau, with his blank slate and lack of face helping put players in his shoes and adding to the immersion of the first-person experience. Ethan goes through harrowing events during his Baker House expedition, witnessing countless disgusting sights, the exorcism of his girlfriend, and even loses limbs. When it comes to fighting back, he struggles to steady his gun, and the game draws attention to that with a gun that takes too long to reload, making the close box combat situations even more stressful. Village is Ethan's second rodeo, and through his actions, Ethan shows it. Not wanting to settle after the events of the previous game, we discover Ethan has had military training. Through exploration of his home, we can find books on the use of firearms too. You can't really blame him, can you? As he progresses, he begins to embody the cheesy Hollywood action protagonist down to textbook definitions, fighting for his family and telling bosses to eat shit, among many other one-liners. Ethan did deliver lines like these in Biohazard as well, but they seem even more cheesy here, simply because of the frequency that they occur. It may also be that I actually focused on them more myself because of how less scared I was. As an audience, we've become desensitized to the punishment Ethan is put through. This begun in Biohazard, but Village really hammers it in. In the first half of the game, he loses fingers, gets impaled through multiple body parts, plummets through multiple buildings, and even loses and reattaches his arm, complete with his jacket sleeve intact. Though the game does come up with a brilliant twist storyline explanation for this, which does make it easier to swallow, and the punishment Ethan receives moves into the realm of absurd comedy the more ridiculous his feats become. The evolution of Ethan's character reflects well in the changes made to the core gameplay loop too. Biohazard was a tense survival horror experience through and through, and was much more selective in its first half about how the action took place, and when it did, it could be a disorientating and stressful experience. Ethan is a novice with his gun, as explained earlier, taking careful time to aim the crosshair, he reloads slowly, and his bullet packs little punch. Enemies are often packed into tight spaces, with the moulded enemies often blending into dark environments. Depending on your screen brightness, they can completely take you by surprise. Moulded can be efficient enemies with very unpredictable movements. Even after downing them, they can still leap at you from the floor legless if you aren't careful. Bullets are scarce, it's highly possible to run out of them if you're reckless. The inventory screen is also a challenge in itself. Though it can be upgraded, you will have to be tactical about which items you store and which items you don't. By comparison, Village is still a survival horror game, but it ventures into much more streamlined action and gunplay at the expense of its horror. As mentioned before, Ethan's special training has made him much better at handling a gun. His aim is improved and his shots feel more accurate. There are many more instances where enemies are placed within larger open spaces, allowing you to better manage the enemies that surround you. The game encourages this if you want to survive. Enemies go down for the count much easier, especially as you upgrade Ethan's arsenal. The Duke handles this upgrade system, which allows you to upgrade weapon power, ammo capacity, and reload speed. The treasure system also allows you to constantly buy replacement ammo or new guns if you find yourself struggling with equipment. This absolutely trumps the available upgrades in Biohazard, which were locked around finding secret collectible coins. Here, every single enemy drops currency or an item. Inventory management is also a far smaller concern, as you now have a briefcase with considerably more space from the offset. Perhaps the most impactful change is the sheer difference in number of enemies fought during the first hour. While Biohazard does place you in hand-to-hand unkillable boss encounters, you don't come face-to-face with your first killable molded until around the 1 hour gameplay mark. In this same time duration in Village, you've already killed at least 3 or 4 times the amount of Lycans. I became desensitized to these enemies from the offset, and while I ran from them to begin with, I quickly realized they are there to defeat, not run from. Biohazard also desensitized you to the molded, with the second half of the game shifting its focus towards action, and the horror of the game does fade away in these moments. Village does this from the offset, showing its cards very early on. In some of the action sections and large arena style areas, I was shocked to find myself trying to jump repeatedly, despite Ethan not having the ability to do so. The way I was playing the game subconsciously felt like I was playing Doom Eternal, and I was replicating my mouse and keyboard playstyle from that game, which sums up how much of the move and shoot loop that the game enters. Of course, if you've clicked this video having played Village, you're likely thinking to yourself, where is the mention of that section? So here it is. House Benevento was easily the scariest section of the game for me, and it feels like it is intended to be the game's defined horror segment, whether you found it scary or not. In a similar way to Lucas's section from Biohazard, this segment strips you of all of your items and pushes you into horror directly. The effect of taking your power away was much more effective to me this time around, purely because of just how powerful you have felt up until this point. The tension that follows in this section is masterfully crafted, encompassing all of the fear of the unknown elements that I love from Biohazard's intro, with the long walk to the house displaying plenty of warning signs. A vision of Mia and Rose, a baby's pram, and the giving up of a family photo connected with me much more on a psychological level, purely because I knew more about Ethan and his story. It was easier for my mind to go to that scary place when I shared that connection with him. My fear built through the segments within the house itself, starting with the dolls, head into the basement, and the loss of light. The psychological horrors are expanded upon with further interrogation of Ethan's own personal memories, the puppet recreation of Mia, his dead wife, being its main puzzle piece. Remember how I said the Winter's home was the perfect setting for horror in the intro? House Benevento draws upon this, removing actual items that we could interact with in that space, implying that whoever set this up has access to the Winters family home. The horror comes to a head when you find yourself face to face with the baby itself. It's horrifying to look at, sounds like it walks straight out of hell with distorted baby cries, and you encounter it when you are at your weakest in the most claustrophobic space of the entire game. When I ran away from this creature in the dark, my heart pounded, and I found myself terrified when moving through rooms when I didn't know where I was going. Getting in the lift at the end of the level was the biggest relief of the game for me, much like killing Marguerite in Biohazard. While House Benevento didn't make me want to stop playing Village, like some of the earlier segments of Biohazard had, I can also acknowledge that Jack and Marguerite probably had better prepared me to face my fears in this segment. I may have very well switched off the game if I hadn't had practice outrunning these tricky enemies prior. I do think the decision to change the vibe of Village takes into account that simply delivering another horror experience may have been an impossible task given how much Biohazard had succeeded on this level. I also don't mean to imply that Village is a cakewalk, as it's still very much ominous, creepy and stressful. Despite feeling much more powerful with Ethan's improved arsenal, Village is constantly putting pressure on you. There are often large waves of enemies of many different styles coming after you. They can make you feel overwhelmed and they can put you under real pressure. The true fun of the game for me was finding the optional treasure hidden around the village that I could sell to upgrade my equipment, giving me a feeling of determined preparation before heading into each new area. The settings of Village are also great at imposing mood. There is so much amazing detail in each of the game's environments, with Castle Dimitrescu being the most impressive. My favourite part of the castle was easily the wine cellar, full of blood and hidden enemies. The dungeon also stood out, and truth be told, this entire segment would have been much more powerful had I not already seen the enemy types revealed in promo trailer footage. It took the surprise away, so I knew what to expect. With the rest of the castle sections, I've admittedly gotten comfortable and a bit cocky when replaying this section of the game a few times over, but that doesn't mean that I don't nearly jump out of my skin if I run through a door and find myself in front of Dimitrescu or one of the other daughters. It isn't fear in the same way, but there have been numerous times where the game has made me jump via its incredible sound design, quite often taking me by surprise or giving me the creeps. Though the factory came towards the end of the title when I was at my strongest, I actually found myself feeling very unnerved by the enemies and setting, which is a huge juxtaposition to the salt mines towards the end of Biohazard. Walking through these corridors had me thinking an enemy was going to come to life at any moment. The atrociously confusing map had me feeling lost, and the new armoured enemy types had me blowing through ammo and feeling concerned about how much I was going through. Outside of these elements, however, I experienced much more joy than I did fear overall, especially when compared to the fears of Biohazard in general. While Kanda technically told the truth when he said Village wasn't as scary overall, and the game's intro, characters and gameplay backs that up, the horror highs of House Benevento certainly does offer comparable scares to the horrors found in Biohazard. It just isn't as big of a piece of the complete package. While I wasn't personally as afraid playing it, largely down to the increased action and retreading of familiar territory, I found Village infinitely more enjoyable than Biohazard overall, and believe that the changes to the previous game's formula make for a much more well-rounded and enjoyable experience. The core gameplay is genuinely more fun, with the gunplay being a real highlight. There are so many ways to play, new enemies to take down, and that partners very well with the game's boosted replay value. After finishing the main story, you have New Game Plus, harder difficulties, Mercenaries mode, unlockable weapons, and tons of bonus collectibles to find, and I was shocked at how immediately I found myself wanting to play through the game again. I've literally never wanted to speedrun a game like this, yet here I am going for the 3-hour achievement as I write this video. In comparison to Biohazard, I've gone back and played it again for the purpose of this video too, but it most definitely wasn't something I found myself eager to do so prior. It was an experience that I felt relieved to finish, but wasn't one that I was desperate to relive again. Biohazard had a terrifying first half, which I found to be a horror masterpiece, but it lost some of that magic as it progressed and eased into a more familiar Resident Evil tone. By the end of my experience, the lack of enemy variety wasn't all that intimidating, and it became a bit of a mindless action slog, with an admittedly awesome cinematic ending. Village, by comparison, is cheesy Resident Evil to its core and maintains an almost constant pace of thrills, sacrificing the overall scares and psychological tension of its predecessor in favour of, well, fun. It's an action-oriented gameplay experience that knows that it can't effectively match the horrors of the previous title. It instead builds on the gameplay foundation whilst also providing a tribute to those horror elements in dedicated sections, and it's definitely a take I enjoyed. If Capcom can replicate the shocks and fears of House Beneviento in a future game whilst continuing to pull out this type of replay value and fun, I'm all for it. But who knows? Given how much these two games differed, maybe the next one will take a different approach to fear entirely. Maybe it won't even be first person. Here's hoping they don't completely cut the scary moments entirely. So what did you think of Village? Did you find there were moments that scared or creeped you out? Or did it not scare you at all? Let me know in the comments section. Cheers for watching, and let's give a hand to Ethan for giving us two of the best survival horror games in recent memory. Special shout out as always goes to my top tier patrons, Froggy and David Hernandez. Please consider joining them if you want to help the channel out.